And Samantha, thank you for the bicycle. It was thoughtful. I kept my voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of the confusion currently screaming inside me. I watched my mother, Jessica, rearrange her silk napkin with a hand that trembled just enough for me to notice. The Hamptons air, usually crisp with sea salt, felt heavy with the suffocating scent of a lie. Samantha froze, her large pearls catching the dining room's golden light as she set down her crystal glass. Abigail, what are you talking about? I didn't send you a used bike. I wired $1 million for your forensic firm's expansion 3 weeks ago. Across the table, my sister Taylor's coffee splashed onto her white silk dress. She didn't even flinch. The air turned to ice. The deception was finally leaking. Abigail is standing there in a Hamptons mansion, being offered a piece of junk, while $1 million of her money vanished. If this were you, would you walk out immediately or stay to find the proof? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't feel my heart break. Instead, I felt my mind sharpen into a clinical, icy edge. In my world, numbers don't lie, even when people do. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was a balance sheet. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family for too long, but that subscription was officially canceled. I sat back in the heavy, velvet-lined chair, my fingers moving with the precision that comes from years of tracking digital shadows for international banks. While Taylor frantically scrubbed the dark coffee stain on her white silk dress, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal, I reached down. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to tell me why they thought I was worth less than a rusted pile of metal. I simply reached into my bag, pulled out my slim carbon fiber laptop, and slid it onto my lap beneath the heavy, cream-colored silk tablecloth. The table was large enough that the low glow of the screen remained invisible to everyone but me. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an audit. Above the table, the social performance continued in a desperate attempt to regain control. My sister, Taylor, her voice rising an octave in a pitch of forced cheerfulness, started talking about her new white G-Class. She described the leather, the custom rims, and how it was the ultimate reward for her hard work as a luxury blogger. She was talking to the room, but her eyes were fixed on Aunt Samantha, trying to drown out the $1 million question that was still vibrating in the air. My mother, Jessica, leaned forward, her pearls clicking against the edge of the table. She tried to laugh, a sound that was brittle and utterly lacking in conviction. She told Samantha that there must be a clerical error at the bank, that the Hamptons air was making everyone too serious, and that we should focus on the wine. I ignored them. My fingers danced across the trackpad. I bypassed my firm's standard firewall and entered my private, level 1 forensic portal. I watched the cursor blink. It was a rhythmic, patient heartbeat in a room full of panic. I didn't look at the turkey or the expensive china. I looked at the routing numbers. $1 million. It was a number that represented my independence, the fund I had spent my entire career building to finally launch my own firm and walk away from the corporate grind. I traced the wire transfer from 3 weeks ago. My Aunt Samantha had been precise. $1 million had been moved from her primary business holding account into a joint account she shared with me, an account my mother had access to as a secondary trustee. I followed the digital scent through 3 separate layers of encryption. My professional instincts, sharpened by a decade of chasing money launderers, saw the threads immediately. 20 hours after the initial deposit, $999,800 had been moved. It didn't go to my business expansion account. It went to a shell entity registered as Irving Investments Limited Liability Company. I checked the registry in real time. The registered agent? Jessica Irving, my mother. From that shell account, the money had been bled out in large, jagged chunks. $210,000 for a white Mercedes-Benz G-Class. $150,000 for a wedding venue deposit in New York. $50,000 for a custom designer gown. It was a list of my sister's vanities, all bought with the currency of my stolen future. My compassion for them had been a luxury they'd overdrawn for years, but now the account was empty. I watched Taylor on the other side of the table. She was still talking, gesturing with a hand that sported a 3-carat diamond. She looked at me, her gaze lingering on my plain navy sweater, a look of pity etched into her face as she told the guests how hard it must be to work in such a sterile environment like forensics. She didn't know that inside my laptop, I was currently looking at the purchase contract for that very ring. I navigated to the administrative console of my personal holdings. I didn't hesitate. I clicked the icon for immediate asset protection. I selected the shell account tied to Irving Investments. I watched the confirmation prompt appear on the screen. Are you sure you wish to freeze all associated assets and initiate a fraud investigation? I rubbed my eyes, not to summon a tear, but to ensure my clarity was absolute. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I hit the enter key. The digital world is faster than the physical one. In a fraction of a second, the $1 million, or what was left of it, was locked. The credit lines Taylor was using to fund this very Thanksgiving retreat were severed. The remaining $500,000 in the shell account was frozen under a forensic hold. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I closed the lid with a soft click that no one heard over my mother's frantic explanation of a bank misunderstanding. I looked up and met Samantha's unwavering gaze. She was a titan who had built an empire from nothing, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. She wasn't shocked by what they'd done. She was shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. It was cool, clean, and refreshing. The main course was arriving, carried by a team of servers, but the feast was already over. I set the glass down and turned my attention back to the table. Calm, factual, lethal. I was the owner of the house now, and the audit was just beginning. I stared at the pristine white plate in front of me. It was bone china, expensive and delicate, just like the facade I had spent 12 years reinforcing. I had been the silent architect of this family's comfort, the one who worked the double shifts while they enjoyed the view. My mother always called me reliable, a word that sounds like a compliment but functions as a cage. I remembered when Taylor wanted that $40,000 marketing degree from that elite university in the city. My mother came to me with tears in her eyes, telling me that Taylor had so much potential, but no way to reach it. I was 24, just starting my career, but I was the one who balanced the books. I paid every cent of those tuition bills. I told myself it was for her future. I didn't realize I was just funding her vanity. Later, when the property taxes on this very Hamptons estate went unpaid for 2 years, it was my signature that saved it. I wired the money during a layover in London, barely having enough time to eat between meetings. I was the one who kept the roof over their heads when they were on the brink of foreclosure. But when the holidays came, I was never the star of the story. In the main hallway of this house, there is a large, gilded frame. It is a family portrait from 3 years ago. Taylor is in the center, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. She is glowing, the embodiment of the Irving name. If you look closely at the far edge, you can see a shoulder and a sliver of dark hair. That is me. I was the one who paid for the photographer, yet I was cropped out of the legacy I was financing. My mother told me I looked tired that day, and that it was better if the focus remained on the vision of the family. I kept wondering for a long time what I ever did wrong to deserve being a footnote. Why did I allow myself to be the invisible infrastructure of their lives? It was a trap of cruel normalization. In my family, the exploitation wasn't a secret, it was a lifestyle. My mother had a gift for turning my exhaustion into a noble duty, while Taylor's endless demands were treated as necessary ambition. They created a world where my only value was what I could provide, and any request for recognition was labeled as drama. This normalization is a psychological prison without bars. They didn't just steal my money, they tried to steal my sense of self by convincing me that being used was my natural role in the family ecosystem. But forensics taught me that every action leaves a trace. You cannot bleed someone dry forever without leaving a stain. I looked up from my water glass and saw Taylor's 3-carat diamond ring shimmering. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry. But all I saw was the $40,000 degree she never used and the property taxes I had paid with my youth. The normalization ended the moment Aunt Samantha spoke the number. $1 million. That wasn't a duty. That was a heist. I wasn't an architect anymore. I was the demolition crew. My mother didn't apologize. She didn't even acknowledge the digital void where my $1 million had vanished. Instead, she looked at Aunt Samantha with the practiced, pitying smile that made my skin crawl. Samantha, you've worked so hard for so many decades. The real estate market, the empire, it takes a toll. Perhaps the Hamptons' humidity is getting to you. You're 78 now. Maybe the numbers are getting a little fuzzy in your head. The accusation was clinical. My mother was effectively labeling the woman who built their entire world as senile to save her own skin. She reached over, trying to pat Samantha's hand, but Samantha pulled away with a sharpness that signaled the end of the peace treaty. Jessica didn't stop. She turned to the guests, her voice a stage whisper. Abigail has always been so dramatic about money. It's some sort of clerical error, I'm sure. Abigail is just overreacting because she's always felt like the runner-up. Taylor saw the opening and took it with the predatory instinct of a true influencer. She didn't scrub the coffee stain anymore. She weaponized it. She reached for her titanium iPhone and hit the button to go live on Instagram. Her fingers didn't shake this time. She adjusted the ring light of her persona in an instant. Within seconds, her 100,000 followers were watching a curated tragedy. Hey guys, I'm so sorry to bring this heavy energy to the feed, but I'm at our family retreat and things are getting scary. My sister Abigail is having some kind of episode. She's obsessed with these numbers, these delusions. She's trying to ruin Aunt Samantha's holiday with these bitter accusations. I guess some people just can't handle seeing others succeed. Taylor's voice was that breathless, syrupy tone she used to sell lifestyle tea and fake happiness. She panned the camera toward me, catching my plain navy sweater and the sterile glow of my laptop. I sat there, a silent target in her digital coliseum. I watched the hearts and crying emojis float up the screen of her phone. Her followers were already typing their vitriol, calling me a jealous hater and a toxic sister. My mother leaned in, her voice low and venomous under the cover of Taylor's live stream. You've created a mess, Abigail. You've always been the difficult one. If you had any dignity, you'd leave this house and never come back. You're ruining Taylor's brand over a mistake that doesn't even exist. The toxicity was reaching a boiling point, a thick, dark vapor that filled the room. They weren't just gaslighting me, they were broadcast gaslighting me to the world. They were using my silence as proof of my instability. But they forgot one thing about forensics. We don't just find the truth. We wait for the suspect to get comfortable in their lie. I didn't answer a single accusation. I went back to my spreadsheet. The numbers were still there, and unlike my family, they weren't capable of performing for an audience. Taylor's phone was still pointed at me, its screen a waterfall of digital judgment. Her followers were feasting on the narrative of the bitter, jealous sister, but I remained focused on the numbers. Aunt Samantha stood up then, not with the frailty my mother had suggested, but with the posture of a woman who had once liquidated a $500 million real estate portfolio in a single afternoon. She didn't reach for her wine. She reached for the slim, black leather briefcase she had kept at her side since she arrived. Jessica, you think my age has made me blind, but it has only made me a more patient observer. Samantha's voice was a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate the very glass in the room. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it squarely on the silk tablecloth right next to the turkey that was now cold and forgotten. My mother's hand stopped midair, her fingers hovering near a silver spoon. The folder wasn't digital. It was physical, heavy, and undeniable. This represents the silent regret of the watcher. For years, Aunt Samantha had sat in these rooms, a quiet witness to a tragedy in slow motion. She had seen the dynamics long before I had the language to describe them. She saw the way my mother turned me into a ghost in my own home, a utility to be used rather than a daughter to be loved. I remember a hallway in your old house that always smelled like burnt toast and silence, Samantha said, her eyes fixed on my mother. I would stand there, out of sight, listening to you tell Abigail she was a phase, not a future. I watched you take her childhood savings to buy Taylor designer dress for a prom she didn't even want to attend. I saw it all. And my regret is that I stayed silent for so long, hoping you would find a shred of integrity on your own. I didn't want to be the one to tear this family apart. But watching you steal a $1 million legacy meant for Abigail's firm while she was out working 80-hour weeks to pay your property taxes, that was the finish line. Samantha opened the folder to the first page. It was a comprehensive log of every unauthorized withdrawal and every suspicious transfer my mother had made over the last decade. There were transcripts of recorded phone calls where Jessica coached Taylor on how to lie about her influencer sponsorships to cover the fact that their lifestyle was being subsidized by my stolen business expansion fund. I've been the watcher for 20 years, Abigail, Samantha said, turning to me. I was waiting for you to stop being the invisible architect and start being the owner. Now that you've conducted your audit, I'm providing the evidence to close the books. The professional escalation had shifted from a digital trace to a physical indictment. Jessica's face was no longer red with anger. It was the color of ash. Taylor's phone finally dipped, the live stream capturing nothing but the expensive hardwood floor as the weight of the watcher's silence finally broke the room. I did not need to raise my voice to be the loudest person in the room. The power had already shifted toward the cold, blue glow of my tablet. I stood up and synchronized the device with the large 50-inch smart screen above the fireplace, the same screen my sister Taylor used to display her Woman of Impact awards to anyone who would listen. Today, it was going to show the impact of a different kind of work. On the screen appeared the digital scan of the power of attorney document, the single piece of paper that had allowed my mother, Jessica, to siphon $1 million into her shell company. At first glance, the signature at the bottom was a perfect replica of mine. The aggressive slant of the letters, the heavy pressure on the downward strokes, it was a masterpiece of mimicry. My mother stared at the screen, her breathing becoming shallow and ragged. I used the digital zoom, enlarging the signature until the ink was the size of boulders. I explained to the room that a digital forensic analysis is not about what is there, but about what is missing. When people forge a signature, they focus on the visual image. They try to capture the feel of the writing, but they never capture the subconscious security habits of a professional who spends her life protecting data. I have a habit I call my analog security dot. It is a feature I developed in my early 20s, a tiny analog safety net in a digital world. Whenever I sign a high-stakes legal document, I place a microscopic dot no larger than a speck of dust, exactly 3 millimeters to the upper right of the first letter of my name. It is nearly invisible to the naked eye. I pointed to a legitimate document on the left side of the screen and showed the dot, highlighted in a red circle. Then I swiped to the forged power of attorney. The space was blank. I watched my mother's hand instinctively go to her throat. My voice was clinical, a verbal audit. The pen pressure on this forgery is unnaturally uniform. There is none of the microscopic variation that occurs when a real human hand moves across a page. And most importantly, my security dot is missing. You focused so hard on copying the image of my name, Mom, that you forgot to replicate the security features I used to protect it. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is identity theft and interstate wire fraud. Taylor's face didn't just lose its color, it turned the shade of damp ash. She looked at her phone, which was still live streaming the entire forensic breakdown to her 100,000 followers. The comment section was a firestorm of exposed and call the police tags. Her digital empire was evaporating in real time. Aunt Samantha didn't wait for a confession. She stood at the head of the table and informed the room that the state police were already at the estate gate. She had provided them with the digital logs and the forensic file 10 minutes ago. The professional escalation was complete. The criminal twist had stripped away the last of their excuses, leaving only the sound of sirens approaching through the Hamptons mist. Abigail, please have mercy. We are your flesh and blood. My mother's voice was a jagged whisper now, the elegant Charleston lilt replaced by the raw panic of a corner thief. She reached across the bone china, her manicured fingers trembling as she tried to grasp my hand, her pearls clashing against the table in a rhythmic, frantic clicking. Think of the family. Think of your sister's future. If the police take us, the Irving name is destroyed forever. You can earn another $1 million, Abigail. You're so smart, so successful. But Taylor, she has nothing else. I pulled my hand back, the movement cold and clinical. You're right, Mom. Taylor has nothing else because she spent her entire life stealing from the only person who was actually building a future for all of us. The sound of approaching sirens was suddenly eclipsed by a much heavier, mechanical grinding in the driveway. A large flatbed truck, amber lights flashing aggressively against the Hamptons mist, pulled up directly behind Taylor's pristine white Mercedes-Benz G-Class. Taylor shrieked, her phone finally slipping from her hand and clattering onto the table, the lens still pointed upward, capturing her face as it twisted in pure, unadulterated terror. "No! That's my car! I paid for that!" She screamed, lunging toward the window, her silk dress catching on the corner of the heavy mahogany table. "Actually, Taylor, you didn't," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics like a scalpel. "You used the $1 million as collateral for a predatory, high-interest loan to cover your secret gambling debts. Since I initiated the forensic freeze on those accounts 20 minutes ago, your automated payment didn't clear. The bank doesn't wait for family drama or excuses. They just take back their assets." Through the window, we watched as the repossession team efficiently hooked the $200,000 SUV. Taylor's Instagram Live was still running, the phone on the table broadcasting the entire scene to her 100,000 followers. People she had lied to for years were currently watching the literal towing of her manufactured life. The comments were a waterfall of fraud, scammer, and karma. Her digital empire wasn't just falling. It was being dragged away in chains in front of the world. My mother turned back to me, her eyes red and streaming with tears, her posture finally breaking as she slumped into her chair. "How can you be so cruel? This is our home. We have nowhere to go." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, heavy vellum envelope. I didn't slide it. I placed it firmly in front of her, right over her spilled wine. "That's the second thing you're wrong about, Mom. This hasn't been your home for a long time. I was the one who paid the $300,000 in back taxes when you were on the brink of foreclosure 3 years ago. I was the one who signed the maintenance contracts while you were busy forging my name to steal my business expansion fund. I was busy legally securing the deed to this property to protect it from your incompetence. I watched her open the envelope with shaking hands. The word eviction was printed in bold, clinical type at the top. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises, I said. My tone as icy as the Atlantic outside. I'm not a cash cow anymore, Mom. I'm the owner of this house. And as of this moment, your subscription to my life has been terminated. The front door burst open, the cool Hamptons air rushing in as the first officers entered the room. I stood up, my laptop tucked under my arm, and didn't look back as the cuffs clicked shut behind me. I had finished the audit. The balance was finally zero. The flashing red and blue lights gradually dissolved into the thick Hamptons mist, leaving behind a silence that was finally, for the first time in 33 years, peaceful. I didn't feel the sting of regret or the weight of a broken legacy. I didn't feel the need to cry for the mother who had just been led away in handcuffs or the sister whose manufactured world had been towed away in chains. Instead, I felt a clinical, sharp clarity. The audit was closed, and the balance was zero. Aunt Samantha sat beside me on the porch, her presence a solid anchor in the quiet. She didn't offer a shallow platitude about blood being thicker than water. She understood that some bonds are not worth the interest you pay on them. She had been the silent watcher of a tragedy in slow motion, and now she was the witness to its necessary conclusion. Standing there, looking out at the cold Atlantic, I realized that cutting these ties was not an act of revenge. It was a necessary amputation. This is the reality of choosing yourself over blood. For too long, I had been taught that family was a contract you couldn't cancel, even when the other parties were defaulting on every moral obligation. I was the invisible architect who financed their lifestyle while they edited me out of their story. But the truth I have found in the digital shadows is that family is not a biological sentence you must serve. It is a reciprocal arrangement based on integrity and safety. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is to walk away from people who share your DNA, but do not share your values. You are not a monster for refusing to be a victim, and you are not selfish for choosing to breathe. I used my laptop one last time before we left for the city. I didn't trace a wire or audit a shell company. I officially registered the Forensic Integrity Fund, seeding it with the remaining $500,000 recovered from my mother's illegal accounts. It will serve as a resource for others who are being bled dry by toxic relatives, providing the legal and financial tools to help them reclaim their lives. I opened the family group chat and didn't wait for a notification or a plea. I simply hit leave. Then I deleted the contact entries for Jessica and Taylor forever. I sat on the porch until the first rays of the morning sun began to burn through the coastal fog. No guilt, no noise. Just the rhythm of the waves and the realization that I was finally the sole author of the chapters to come. Abigail built a foundation from the ashes of her family's greed. If you've ever had to choose yourself over a toxic bond, leave a ficon in the comments. Let's show each other we're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.